For the last decade or more, Windows has sat completely unchallenged in the world of PC gaming. But the changes we have seen inside SteamOS this year have raised a genuine question whether that monopoly is finally starting to crack. In today's video, I'm going to break down in detail exactly how SteamOS is gradually becoming a serious threat to Windows, and whether it is actually realistic that PC gamers will move away from Windows towards SteamOS in the coming years. Watch till the end, because I'm going to cover every angle that makes this competition genuinely real, rather than just hype. Let me first give you some background so new viewers understand where this whole story begins. SteamOS is Valve's own operating system built on Arch Linux, originally designed for the Steam Deck when it launched back in 2022. At the time, very few people expected this operating system to ever move beyond handheld devices and become a serious contender for full-fledged gaming PCs. But Valve gradually expanded its vision, and with the release of SteamOS 3.8 in June 2026, the company officially confirmed that you can now install SteamOS on your own custom-built PC. This announcement matters so much because before this, SteamOS was limited to specific hardware, mainly the Steam Deck and a handful of selected handhelds. Now that it officially supports custom desktop PCs as well, even if it is still in beta, it means that millions of existing gaming PCs running AMD hardware suddenly have a genuine alternative to Windows available to them. This is exactly the factor that turns this whole competition from theoretical into practical. Let me walk you through the specific reasons that are actually making SteamOS this threatening to Windows. The first and biggest reason is that the performance gap has largely closed. In the past, whenever people talked about Linux gaming, the very first concern was always whether games would even run properly at all. But through Valve's Proton compatibility layer, which allows Windows games to run on Linux, a huge number of popular games now run without any issues, and sometimes even with better performance than on Windows. The second big reason is boot speed and overall system responsiveness. SteamOS is an immutable system, meaning the core operating system files are read only, which makes it significantly more stable and faster compared to Windows. When I tested SteamOS myself, the system was fully ready in around 10 to 15 seconds, whereas on Windows this usually takes anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes. This difference might sound small, but it is genuinely noticeable in daily use, and this kind of convenience genuinely impresses users. The third big factor working in SteamOS's favor is the controller experience and console-like simplicity. SteamOS 3.8 has reduced handheld controller input latency from 5 to 8 milliseconds, down to just 100 to 500 microseconds on supported devices. This is a massive improvement that makes a real difference in fast-paced competitive games. On top of that, the entire game mode interface feels console-like, which is especially appealing to people who want to use their PC in a living room setup with a big TV, something Windows still does not offer in a seamless way. Now let me tell you how Valve is building its entire ecosystem, so this threat does not remain limited to just an operating system, but instead becomes a complete alternative platform. The first piece of this strategy is the upcoming Steam machine. With SteamOS 3.8, Valve has added initial support for its new Steam machine, a living room gaming PC that will run SteamOS. This device is going to act as a bridge between console and PC, showing that Valve is not just building an operating system, it is building an entire hardware and software ecosystem that directly targets both the console and traditional PC markets. The second important piece is third-party partnerships like the Lenovo Legion Go S. This device is currently the only third-party handheld officially available on the market with powered by SteamOS status, meaning customers can buy it with SteamOS already installed without going through any installation process themselves. This shows that Valve does not want to remain limited to just its own hardware. It is also partnering with other companies, so SteamOS can reach as many devices as possible. Now let's talk about what I personally think is the most compelling argument in favor of SteamOS, and that is pricing and accessibility. Windows requires a paid license unless it comes bundled with your hardware, but SteamOS is completely free to download and install on your own PC. For anyone with an older AMD-based gaming rig, or anyone building a new system, this means you can explore a completely different gaming experience without spending a single extra dollar, which makes this a genuinely low-risk decision. But I want to stay honest here as well, because there are still some real issues that keep Windows ahead in this competition, and it is important to discuss them, so this video does not sound one-sided. The biggest issue that could be a deal-breaker for a lot of gamers is anti-cheat compatibility. Since SteamOS disables Secure Boot as part of its installation process, it does not support the kernel-level anti-cheat systems used by companies like EA and Activision in their competitive games. If you regularly play competitive multiplayer games, which are often among the most popular titles, those games may simply not run on SteamOS at all. This does not look like an issue that will be resolved anytime soon, since it is more of a policy matter for the anti-cheat companies rather than something within Valve's control. The second big issue is the lack of Nvidia GPU support. Right now, SteamOS is only compatible with AMD GPUs, meaning anyone using an Nvidia graphics card does not even have the option to try SteamOS yet. Since Nvidia is the most popular brand in the gaming GPU market, especially in the high-end and enthusiast segment, this limitation significantly restricts SteamOS's potential reach until Valve solves this problem. The third issue is the overall limitation of the software ecosystem. On Windows, you can find pretty much any kind of software, whether for creative work, professional applications, or specialized tools. Since SteamOS is Linux-based and primarily designed for gaming, anyone who uses their PC for anything beyond gaming may run into issues. This matters especially for people who treat their gaming PC as their primary work machine as well. Now, I also want to tell you that this is not an isolated development. It is part of a broader trend where Linux gaming overall is improving. Besides SteamOS, other gaming-focused Linux distributions like Bazzite and CachyOS are also rapidly gaining popularity, and together they are making the Linux gaming ecosystem more mature than it has ever been before. When multiple players are moving in the same direction, it builds momentum for the entire industry, and game developers gradually start taking Linux compatibility more seriously as well. Along the same lines, I also want to mention that community-driven websites like ProtonDB are making this transition easier as well. These platforms tell users which games run well through Proton and which ones have issues, helping potential SteamOS users make their decision before actually switching. The more this community data grows, the more confidence new users get to try this transition themselves. Now let me tell you how Microsoft itself seems to be viewing this competition. While Microsoft has never publicly acknowledged SteamOS as a threat directly, if you look at recent gaming-focused improvements inside Windows, like Xbox app integration, handheld optimizations, and gaming performance modes, it becomes fairly clear that Microsoft is also trying to improve its own gaming experience to retain users on Windows. This itself is proof that the competition is genuinely real, because if SteamOS were not a threat at all, Microsoft would not need to refine its gaming experience this way. Another interesting angle worth sharing is how handheld gaming devices like the Asus ROG Ally, Legion Go, and MSI Claw have effectively become a testing ground for the entire Linux gaming transition. Several reports confirm that SteamOS delivers better battery life on these devices compared to Windows 11, which is a critical factor for handheld gaming. When handheld users see their experience improve, they gradually start exploring similar alternatives for their desktop systems as well. Now, let me tell you what a realistic timeline for this entire transition might actually look like. In my honest opinion, a complete replacement of Windows within a year or two is simply not possible, since Windows' software ecosystem, driver support, and enterprise adoption are so vast that challenging it will take considerable time. But based on the pace at which Valve has been improving things over the past year or two, I can confidently say that within the next few years, SteamOS will become mature enough to be a genuinely viable primary option for a significant minority of gamers, especially those who mostly play single-player games. I also want to mention that another big factor in SteamOS's growth is the stable snapshot approach Valve recently adopted. Previously, SteamOS followed a rolling release model, meaning new updates arrived fairly quickly without much testing, which sometimes led to bugs and instability. But Valve has now changed this approach, freezing and testing Arch packages for months before release. This change shows that Valve is now trying to make this platform reliable, not just for enthusiasts, but for mainstream users as well, which is quite important for long-term adoption. Let's talk about the comparison everyone actually wants to know about, whether SteamOS can genuinely replace Windows in terms of overall gaming experience. My honest opinion is that if we are only talking about raw performance and frame rates, the two operating systems have gotten quite close, especially for the 8RA titles that run well through the Proton compatibility layer. But Windows is still more flexible for general purpose use. SteamOS, on the other hand, is ahead in that console, like simplicity and focus, where you boot straight into a gaming interface without any unnecessary background processes consuming system resources. I also want to point out that anyone who thinks SteamOS is only for casual gamers should look at some benchmark results I have discussed before. Games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Assetto Corsa Competizione, which rely heavily on CPU and system resources, show quite impressive performance on SteamOS, sometimes even better than on Windows. This shows that this is not just a casual gaming platform, it has genuinely become a competitive option for serious gamers as well. I also want to leave you with one final thought about how to judge this story as it continues to unfold over the coming months. Rather than looking for one single dramatic announcement that declares Windows dead or SteamOS victorious, watch for the small incremental signals instead. Things like how many new A titles launch with day one Proton compatibility confirmed, how many hardware manufacturers announce official SteamOS support alongside Windows, and how Microsoft continues to respond with its own gaming-focused updates. Those quiet, steady signals are a far more reliable way to track who is actually winning this competition than any single headline, and they are exactly the kind of details I plan to keep covering on this channel as this story keeps developing. Let me give you my honest final opinion on whether SteamOS is genuinely the biggest threat Windows has faced in the last decade. In my view, yes, this is genuinely the most serious challenge Windows has faced in the gaming space, but it has not yet become a complete replacement. It has become a great option for people who primarily play single-player games, who want console-like simplicity, and who want to use their gaming PC purely for gaming. But for competitive multiplayer gamers, professional users, and people using specialized hardware, Windows is still the more practical choice. It is also worth noting that this competition is ultimately beneficial for everyone. Once Microsoft realizes that its users genuinely have a viable alternative available to them, it will try even harder to improve its own gaming experience, whether that is performance, gaming features, or pricing. Similarly, Valve will keep improving its technology continuously to maintain its momentum. This kind of healthy competition only brings good things for end users. If you're still unsure whether you should shift your gaming setup to SteamOS, my simple advice would be that if you have AMD-based hardware and mostly play single-player games, go ahead and try it, since you can keep your existing Windows installation safe through a dual boot setup. But if you heavily depend on competitive multiplayer games that use kernel-level anti-cheat, staying on Windows for now would be the more practical choice. So that was my detailed analysis of how SteamOS is gradually becoming a genuine and serious threat to Windows gaming. From boot speed to controller experience, from pricing to upcoming hardware like the Steam Machine, everywhere we looked, we saw Valve designing its entire ecosystem in a way that genuinely challenges Windows gaming monopoly. A complete replacement might still be far off, but this competition has officially begun, and that is simply good news for end users. Let me go a bit deeper into a few of these points, since I think they deserve more attention than a quick mention. On the performance side, it is worth understanding exactly why Proton has improved so dramatically over the past couple of years. Valve has poured significant engineering resources into this compatibility layer, working closely with game developers, and continuously patching edge cases that used to cause crashes or graphical glitches. What used to be a hit or miss experience a few years ago has turned into something remarkably consistent today, to the point where a large percentage of the entire Steam library now runs at what the community rates as playable or better on Linux through Proton, without the end user needing to do anything special at all. I also want to spend a bit more time on the console comparison, since I think it is an underrated part of why SteamOS appeals to such a wide range of people. Consoles have always won on simplicity. You turn them on, and within seconds, you're playing a game, with no driver updates to chase down, no background processes eating into your frame rate, and no confusing settings menus. SteamOS essentially brings that same simplicity to PC hardware while still giving you the flexibility of a real desktop underneath through desktop mode whenever you need it. That combination, console simplicity on the front end with full PC flexibility available underneath, is something Windows has never been able to offer in quite the same way, since Windows was never designed around a console-first philosophy the way SteamOS's game mode clearly is. Let me also address the elephant in the room when it comes to anti-cheat, since I do not want to just mention it briefly and move on. The reason this issue is so stubborn is that kernel-level anti-cheat systems fundamentally rely on deep access to the operating system to detect cheating software, and that same deep access is exactly what Secure Boot is designed to restrict once it gets disabled. This is not a simple compatibility bug Valve can patch away. It is a fundamental architectural conflict between how SteamOS achieves its openness and how these anti-cheat systems achieve their security guarantees. Until either anti-cheat vendors develop a Linux-compatible version of their kernel-level protections, or Valve finds some entirely new way to satisfy those security requirements without compromising SteamOS's openness, this gap is likely to persist. And it is probably the single biggest reason competitive gamers will keep a Windows installation around, even if they also have SteamOS on a second drive. I think it is also worth mentioning how this entire situation benefits from timing. Just as SteamOS has been maturing rapidly, we have also seen memory and component prices climbing sharply, making many people hesitant to build entirely new gaming PCs. This means more people are looking to extend the life of existing hardware rather than replace it outright. And a free operating system upgrade that squeezes more performance and battery life out of the same hardware is exactly the kind of low-cost improvement people are looking for right now. If SteamOS had arrived on custom PCs during a period of cheap, abundant components, it might not have generated nearly as much interest. But arriving during a period where every extra dollar of hardware spending matters more than usual has made this a particularly well-timed development for Valve. I also want to mention something that gets overlooked in a lot of these SteamOS versus Windows debates, which is the psychological effect of simply having a credible alternative exist at all. For years, Windows had no real competitor in gaming, which meant there was little external pressure forcing Microsoft to prioritize gaming-specific improvements over its broader enterprise and productivity-focused priorities. Now that a credible alternative exists, even one that only appeals to a portion of gamers today, it changes the competitive calculus inside Microsoft. And we are already seeing that reflected in a renewed focus on handheld optimization, gaming performance modes, and closer integration with the Xbox ecosystem inside Windows itself. Let me also talk a bit about the developer side of this equation, since a lot of this competition ultimately comes down to whether game studios decide to support Linux more directly rather than relying entirely on Proton to bridge the gap. Historically, native Linux game support from major publishers has been fairly inconsistent, with some studios abandoning their Linux ports over time due to low adoption numbers. But as SteamOS custom PC adoption grows, and especially once the Steam machine actually ships to a wider audience, publishers have a much stronger incentive to at least test their games thoroughly against Proton compatibility before launch, even if they never build a fully native Linux version. A single bad launch on SteamOS, generating a wave of negative reviews from an expanding user base, is now a real business risk, in a way it simply was not a few years ago when almost nobody was gaming on Linux outside a small enthusiast community. I also want to bring up something that rarely gets discussed in these debates, which is how this shift affects the second-hand and budget PC market. A huge number of older gaming PCs, particularly those built around AMD hardware from several years ago, are sitting in people's homes, slightly underpowered for modern Windows, overhead, but still perfectly capable of running games well. SteamOS gives these systems a genuine second life, stripping away a lot of the background bloat that accumulates on a Windows installation over years of use, and replacing it with a lean, purpose-built gaming environment. This means the threat SteamOS poses to Windows is not just about winning over people building brand new systems. It is also about winning over the enormous installed base of older PCs that might otherwise simply be considered obsolete for modern gaming. Something else worth considering is how this entire competition ties back into console gaming as well, not just PC gaming. As SteamOS matures and the Steam machine approaches release, Valve is effectively positioning itself to compete not only with Windows, but with Sony and Microsoft's own console offerings. A living room device that runs actual PC games, supports mods, and connects to the broader Steam library, all while offering console, like ease of use, blurs the line between these two markets in a way that has not really existed before. If this strategy succeeds, the pressure on Windows will not just come from PC enthusiasts switching operating systems, it will also come from an entirely new category of device competing for the same living room space that consoles have dominated for decades. I also think it is worth mentioning the role that price-sensitive markets outside the traditional gaming hubs of North America and Western Europe are likely to play in this shift. In many regions, where every dollar of hardware and software cost matters significantly more, a completely free operating system that runs games well on existing or budget AMD hardware is an extremely attractive proposition compared to paying for a Windows license or investing in expensive DDR5-based systems. If SteamOS adoption grows fastest in these price-sensitive markets first, that could end up shaping game development priorities in ways that eventually benefit SteamOS users everywhere, simply because developers will have more reason to make sure their games run well in that environment. Let me also touch on something practical for anyone actually considering this switch right now rather than just watching from the sidelines. If you decide to try SteamOS on your own AMD-based PC, I would strongly recommend starting with a dual boot setup rather than replacing Windows entirely, at least for the first month or two. This lets you build up your own personal experience of which of your favorite games run well, which ones have anti-cheat issues, and whether the overall experience fits your workflow, all without burning the bridge back to Windows in case something does not work out. Given that SteamOS is completely free and the installation process, while still technically in beta for custom PCs, has become fairly approachable, there really is very little downside to trying this out for yourself rather than just taking anyone's word for it, including mine. One last thing I want to add before moving to my closing thoughts is how quickly narratives can shift in this industry once momentum builds. Just a few years ago, the idea of a mainstream tech reviewer seriously discussing SteamOS as a threat to Windows gaming would have sounded like an overstatement, since Linux gaming was still widely seen as a niche hobby for a small group of enthusiasts willing to tolerate rough edges. The fact that this conversation is now happening across major tech channels, gaming forums, and hardware review sites is itself a signal that something has genuinely changed, not just in the technology itself, but in how seriously the broader gaming community is willing to take it. Momentum like this tends to compound, since every positive review, every successful game launch on SteamOS, and every new device shipping with SteamOS pre-installed makes the next skeptical gamer slightly more willing to give it a try themselves. If you are someone who mostly plays single-player, story-driven, or simulation-style games, and you value a fast, clean, console-like experience, SteamOS is genuinely worth trying today, especially since it costs nothing and can sit alongside your existing Windows installation through dual boot. If you are someone who lives and dies by competitive multiplayer titles with strict anti-cheat requirements, or you rely on specialized Windows-only software for work alongside gaming, Windows remains the safer and more practical choice for the foreseeable future. And if you fall somewhere in between, keeping both options available through dual boot is probably the smartest way to hedge your bets while this competition continues to play out over the next few years. If you found this video useful, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss it whenever we cover a new SteamOS update or Windows gaming news in the future. Let me know in the comments what your own opinion is. Do you think SteamOS can genuinely replace Windows in the future, or do you think it will always remain a niche option? If you have any questions about a specific game's compatibility or the installation process, leave them in the comments, and I will try to answer them in a future video. I also want to say that this is a pretty exciting time in the world of technology, because Windows' dominance over gaming PCs is being seriously challenged for the first time like never before. Whether you are a Windows fan or someone leaning towards Linux, this competition ultimately benefits end users, since companies now have to work harder to make their products better. I hope you enjoyed this honest analysis. Until then, take care of yourself, keep exploring your systems, and I will see you in the next video with a brand new topic. Thank you for watching this video and for supporting the channel.